Jason Walters was the epitome of success. A self-made millionaire, CEO of a growing tech empire, and a man with more money than he knew what to do with. His life seemed perfect on the outside, flawless, enviable even, but deep down, Jason was emotionally empty. His heart had been scarred by a series of failed relationships, all of them falling apart for reasons he couldn't quite grasp. Behind the boardrooms and luxury cars, Jason longed for something he couldn't buy: true love. He had everything anyone could ever dream of, but there was a hollow space inside of him, one that no amount of wealth or status could fill. He wanted a connection that went beyond the superficial, a love that was genuine, not tainted by greed or expectations. Then he met Lily. Lily was everything Jason had never known he was looking for. She was kind-hearted, full of life, and beautiful in a way that wasn't defined by makeup or high-end fashion. She was poor, struggling to make ends meet, working as a waitress at a local diner. Despite her difficult circumstances, she always had a smile on her face, and it was her warmth and simplicity that drew Jason in. It wasn't just her looks, though. She was undeniably beautiful, but the way she carried herself. There was something about Lily that made Jason feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. Her laughter, her optimism, her kindness, everything about her was the opposite of the world he had grown accustomed to. Their worlds were as different as night and day. Jason was used to the glitz and glamour of the elite, while Lily lived in a modest apartment, constantly worried about paying bills. But somehow, their differences didn't matter. They started spending more time together, finding common ground in their conversations, sharing dreams, and even the occasional quiet moment. Jason couldn't help but be drawn to Lily's honesty and the peace she brought him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of expectations on his shoulders. With her, he could just be himself. After a few months, Jason knew he wanted her in his life forever. He didn't care about the wealth that separated them or the judgment from the people around him. Lily was the one who made him feel complete. He proposed to her one quiet evening, in a simple, intimate setting, no extravagant dinners or grand gestures, just the two of them, surrounded by the comfort of their own little world. Lily, overwhelmed by his love and sincerity, said yes without hesitation, her heart full of joy at the thought of marrying the man she had come to love. For Lily, it was the realization of a dream she never thought possible. Coming from a poor background, she never imagined someone like Jason would even look at her, let alone want to marry her. This was the life she had always wanted, a life full of love, security, and a future she could finally look forward to. Little did she know, the life she had dreamed of was about to take a dark turn, one she could never have predicted. From the moment Lily stepped into the opulent Walters estate for the first time, she could feel the weight of Margaret Walters' disapproving gaze. The house was everything Lily had never dreamed of: gleaming marble floors, grand chandeliers, walls adorned with expensive art, and an aura of wealth and power that seemed to hang in the air. But despite the beauty of it all, Lily felt like a stranger in a foreign land, a visitor who didn't belong. She had never been accustomed to such luxury, and it made her feel small, almost invisible. The lavishness of the home only highlighted the disparity between her own modest life and the world Jason had grown up in. Margaret, Jason's mother, didn't help matters. She was a woman of commanding presence, and from the moment they met, Lily could sense her distaste. Margaret's gaze was cold, calculating, as if she were sizing her up, determining if Lily was worthy of her son's love. With her perfect posture and sharp, scrutinizing eyes, Margaret reminded Lily of the kind of woman who could control everything in her world with a single glance. It was the kind of power Lily had never encountered, and she immediately realized she was out of her depth. "I hope you're aware, dear, that you're not the first woman Jason has brought home," Margaret said one evening after dinner, her voice dripping with thinly veiled contempt. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I've seen many of his relationships come and go. Don't get your hopes up." Lily's heart dropped, but she kept her composure. Jason had warned her that his mother could be difficult, but he had assured her that he would protect her. He loved her, and that's all that mattered, right? But Margaret's words stung more than she had expected. Her disapproval was tangible. almost suffocating, and it left Lily feeling like she was nothing more than a passing fancy in the eyes of the woman who had shaped Jason's world. Over the next few weeks, Lily's visits to the Walters home became increasingly uncomfortable. Jason was often away on business trips, leaving her alone to deal with his mother. Margaret's treatment of Lily was subtle at first, small, pointed remarks about her background, her clothes, the way she spoke. "You could use a little more polish," Margaret would say, as though it was a polite suggestion, but the words stung nonetheless. Lily, a girl from a small town who had never been taught the etiquette of the rich, tried her best to keep her head down and be respectful. She wanted to fit in, wanted to be accepted by the woman who would one day be her mother-in-law. But Margaret seemed determined to make that impossible. Then, the manipulation began. It started innocently enough. Margaret would ask Lily to help with simple tasks around the house, organizing the library, tidying the garden, preparing meals. At first, Lily didn't mind. She felt like she was contributing, becoming part of the family. But soon, the tasks became more demanding. Margaret would ask Lily to do things that were far beyond what anyone would consider reasonable, cleaning the entire house, sorting through piles of paperwork, scrubbing floors on her hands and knees. Every time she thought she had completed one task, Margaret would find something else for her to do, pushing her to the brink of exhaustion. It was never enough. And it wasn't just the physical labor. Margaret's true cruelty lay in the emotional toll she inflicted. Every word was a silent attack, every action a reminder that Lily was beneath her. She would make snide comments about Lily's family background, about the fact that she came from nothing. "Jason is used to a certain standard of living, Margaret would say, her voice dripping with insinuation. "I just hope you can keep up." Lily started to feel like a servant in the very house she was supposed to be part of. But the worst part was that Jason had no idea. He was busy with his work, and every time he came home, Margaret put on a mask of politeness. She would smile sweetly at Lily and pretend everything was fine, all while continuing her subtle campaign of emotional abuse when Jason wasn't around. Lily tried to speak to Jason about it. Tried to explain how Margaret's behavior was starting to wear on her. But whenever she did, Jason would brush it off, thinking his mother's actions were just her way of testing Lily. "You know how she is," he would say, offering an apologetic smile. "She'll warm up to you in time." But no matter how much time passed, things only got worse. Every day felt like a battle she couldn't win. Lily couldn't help but wonder if she was just another woman in a long line of women Margaret had tried to break. Was she just a passing phase in Jason's life? Or was she truly the one he loved? The questions gnawed at her, and with each passing day she grew more uncertain. Then, the situation took a darker turn. One evening, Jason had to leave for an extended business trip. Margaret was alone with Lily for the better part of a week. That week, the abuse escalated. The tasks grew more grueling, and Margaret's remarks turned even more cutting. Lily felt like she was slowly losing her grip on reality. She would find herself crying in the bathroom after long days of endless work, not knowing who to turn to. One night, after Lily had spent hours cleaning the kitchen and preparing a meal for Margaret, she collapsed from exhaustion. Margaret, standing at the doorway, watched her with cold, emotionless eyes. "If you're going to marry my son," she said sharply, "you need to learn your place." Lily's heart sank. She felt like an intruder in her own life, like a stranger in a house that was supposed to be her home. She had never felt so small, so insignificant. It was in that moment that Lily realized something she had been denying for too long. Margaret wasn't just trying to control the house. She was trying to control Jason, and anyone who got close to him would feel her wrath. And Lily was no exception. The suspense hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Would Jason ever see his mother for what she truly was? Would he realize that his mother's disapproval wasn't just a harmless quirk, but a deep-seated cruelty that could tear apart the woman he loved? Lily had no answers. Only the sinking feeling that the man she had fallen in love with might never be able to protect her from the woman who had shaped him. The tension between them grew thicker with every passing day, each moment a reminder that love, no matter how strong, could be overshadowed by the darkness of family secrets. Lily had never imagined that a simple, quiet moment could change the course of her life forever. She was sitting alone in the small, sunlit corner of the Walters estate, her mind drifting as she sipped tea. It had been another long day of running errands, cleaning the house, and trying to keep a smile on her face for Margaret, who had become more relentless in her demands. Yet in that moment, a small shift within her body caught her attention. A faint flutter deep inside that felt like the beginning of something new. It wasn't until she took a trip to the doctor that the truth came to light. She was pregnant. The news hit her like a wave, crashing through the monotony of her life. At first, she couldn't believe it. Her hands trembled as the doctor confirmed it, and for a few moments, the world seemed to fade into the background. A life was growing inside her, a small, precious life that would be hers to protect. Lily's heart swelled with joy, and the overwhelming rush of emotions made her feel alive in a way she never had before. This was it. This was the hope she had longed for. It wasn't just her life anymore. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a future that Jason and she would build together. She rushed home to tell Jason, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she held the small pregnancy test in her hands. But Jason's response wasn't what she had hoped for. His face lit up with the same joy, but deep down, she could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. She knew he loved her, but she also knew that this pregnancy, this unexpected blessing, might throw their world into even more chaos. Still, in that moment, she clung to the joy, the warmth of the love they shared. The next few weeks were filled with planning, excitement, and hopes of a new beginning. The thought of their child, a little one who would carry their legacy, made Lily feel like she had finally found her place in this vast world. For a brief moment, the heaviness of Margaret's cruelty lifted, as though the news of the baby had brought a temporary shield around her. But that fragile joy didn't last. Margaret, with her unyielding grip on the household, had never once looked at Lily with anything other than disdain. Now that there was a child on the way, Margaret's hatred for Lily only deepened. The pregnancy was a threat to her, a disruption to the order she had worked so hard to control. She couldn't bear the thought of a new life, especially one born from someone so beneath her, taking root in her family. The idea of Jason's bloodline being shared with a woman like Lily twisted something inside Margaret, and she decided that she would stop at nothing to make sure Lily didn't succeed, didn't have that joy. The manipulation became more insidious. It began with subtle changes. Margaret would help Lily with her medication, suggesting a new routine or offering her own pills, claiming they would make her feel better. At first, Lily didn't suspect anything. Margaret had always been so meticulous, so careful with details, and Lily, naive as she was, trusted her. But as the days went by, Lily began to feel more and more drained. The nausea that had been a normal part of pregnancy seemed to linger far longer than it should. Her body ached in places she hadn't expected. She found herself unable to sleep, her thoughts clouded and heavy. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if something was wrong. Margaret had been playing a dangerous game, and Lily was too unsuspecting to see it. Margaret, with her cold, calculating mind, was tampering with Lily's medications, slipping in something she knew would harm the pregnancy. Every time she handed Lily another pill, every time she made her feel as though this was just part of the process, she was subtly taking away Lily's chance at having the family she dreamed of. Lily could feel the shift in her body, the heaviness in her chest, but she couldn't pinpoint the source. It wasn't until one day when she felt a sharp pain in her abdomen that the truth hit her. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Lily's world began to crumble. The pregnancy, which had brought so much hope, now felt like a fragile dream. The pain, the exhaustion, the constant unease, it was all too much. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to think that someone so close to her, someone she had trusted, could do this to her. But the signs were undeniable. Margaret's cruelty was no longer just emotional, it was physical. One evening, after another round of harsh words from Margaret and another strange batch of pills she had been given, Lily could no longer ignore the fear that had been creeping in. She knew something was terribly wrong. She confronted Margaret, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. But Margaret only smiled, that same cold, poisonous smile that Lily had come to dread. "You think you can take my son from me, don't you?" Margaret's voice was a low whisper, full of venom. "You think you can change everything? You're nothing more than a distraction, a temporary phase in Jason's life. And I won't let you ruin my family." Lily stood there, frozen, her heart racing, as the truth settled like a stone in her chest. Margaret had done this to her. The woman she had tried to get along with, the woman she had tried to impress, was the very one who had set the course for her pain, for her suffering. But the worst part? Jason had no idea. He still thought his mother was merely being difficult, that she was just being protective of him. Lily had no one to turn to, no one to help her, and as the days stretched on, she could feel her body weakening. The life she had once carried so carefully slipping through her fingers. Margaret had won, and Lily was powerless to stop it. Lily's health began to deteriorate in subtle ways, at first so faint that she could brush it off as just part of pregnancy. But as the weeks went on, the signs grew more concerning. The nausea she had once thought was normal during the early stages of pregnancy didn't subside. It lingered, day after day, and no amount of rest seemed to help. Her energy, which had been a constant source of strength, began to drain away. Simple tasks like cooking or cleaning left her feeling weak and dizzy. Even a short walk around the estate left her breathless, her body heavy with exhaustion. She tried to ignore it. After all, pregnancy wasn't always easy, and she had been told to expect some discomfort. But something about the way her body was reacting felt off. There was a constant tightness in her stomach, a feeling she couldn't shake no matter how much she rested. Her sleep was fitful, and when she woke up, her body ached in places it never had before. Lily had always been a woman of resilience, never one to complain. But now, her once bright spirit was clouded with worry. She tried to push aside the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Yet as the days passed, she could no longer ignore the constant discomfort, the waves of dizziness, and the sharp pains that started to intensify in her abdomen. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. The turning point came one afternoon, when she felt a sudden, unbearable cramp in her lower abdomen. It was so sharp and intense that she had to sit down immediately, clutching the arm of the sofa to steady herself. Her heart raced as panic began to settle in. Her baby was at risk. Lily had always trusted Margaret's advice when it came to her medication. But now, with her health rapidly declining, doubt started to creep in. Could the pills Margaret had been giving her be the cause of her misery? They were supposed to help with her symptoms, to keep her healthy and strong. But now she wondered if they were doing the opposite. In a moment of desperation, Lily stopped taking the pills. She knew she couldn't keep going down this path without knowing the truth. The next day, she called her doctor. She needed to see him immediately, to get answers and to understand why her body was failing her. As she walked into the doctor's office, she felt a sense of dread settle in her stomach. The doctor listened intently as she explained her symptoms, his brow furrowing with concern as he examined her. He ordered tests, checking for any signs of complications with the pregnancy. But deep down, Lily feared it might already be too late. The doctor's expression grew more serious as he reviewed the results. "Lily," he said gently, "there's been some damage, and we need to act quickly. Your health and the baby's are in serious jeopardy." Lily's heart dropped. The damage had been done. Despite her best efforts to follow the advice of those around her, the constant deterioration of her health had left her with no other option but to face the truth. She had been sabotaged, and now it was a race against time. The day Lily went into labor was one that Jason had anxiously awaited for months, a day that should have been filled with joy, anticipation, and love. But as soon as the contractions began, a sudden feeling of unease settled in the pit of his stomach. Lily, despite her health struggles, had managed to keep going, to push forward, convinced that this child was the bright future they had dreamed of together. But the pain in her eyes, the way her body trembled with each wave of labor, told him something else. This wasn't going to be an easy birth. Jason tried to stay calm, holding Lily's hand and whispering comforting words as he paced around the room, doing everything in his power to make her feel safe. But he had no idea that the true storm was just beginning. In the chaos of their preparations, Margaret's presence loomed in the background. She had kept herself hidden, watching from the shadows, but her anger was palpable. She had never wanted this, had never wanted Lily to carry Jason's child. The very thought of her son becoming a father to someone so beneath her, someone who had no place in their world, had driven Margaret to madness. And in that moment, with everything about to change, Margaret couldn't contain her fury any longer. As Jason rushed to get things ready for the hospital, his back turned for just a second. Margaret saw her chance. With a flash of rage in her eyes, she pushed Lily, a pregnant woman in labor, down the stairs. The force of the shove sent Lily tumbling, her body slamming against the stairs with a sickening thud. Jason's heart stopped as he heard her scream, and without thinking, he rushed to her side. "Lily," he shouted, panic flooding his voice as he knelt beside her. She was curled up on the floor, her face pale and contorted in pain, tears streaming down her face. "Lily, no. Please, don't do this to me." Lily's breath came in ragged gasps as she clutched her stomach, her body trembling from the fall and the weight of labor that was rapidly accelerating. "Jason," she whispered through gritted teeth, the baby." He picked her up as gently as he could, his heart racing in his chest as he rushed her to the car. Margaret's cruel laughter echoed in the distance, but Jason couldn't spare her a second thought. His focus was entirely on Lily, on getting her to the hospital, and on saving the child she carried. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. Jason's hands gripped the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white, but it didn't matter. His mind was consumed with the image of Lily's pained face, the feeling of her slipping away from him. The world outside blurred as he sped through the streets, praying to anyone who might be listening for a miracle. He knew time was running out. At the hospital, the doctors rushed her into an emergency room, quickly taking over and working frantically to stabilize her. But no one had prepared Jason for what came next. A few minutes later, the doctors returned, their faces grim, their expressions telling him everything he feared. "Mr. Walters," one of the doctors said in a quiet voice, "we have a serious situation here. Lily's body is under severe stress. If we don't make a decision now, neither she nor the baby will make it." Jason's blood ran cold. "What do you mean? What do you need to do?" The doctor's gaze hardened. "The baby is in distress, and Lily's condition is rapidly deteriorating. If we attempt to save one, the other won't survive." Jason felt as though the earth had shifted beneath him. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing to make sense of the impossible decision that lay before him. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "I can't choose. I can't lose either of them." "I'm sorry," the doctor said, his voice sympathetic but firm. "But you need to decide. If we don't act now, both of them will die." Jason's world crumbled in that instant. He had never felt so powerless, so utterly broken. His heart ached as he looked at Lily, her face pale and strained with agony. She was already slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But then his gaze fell on the monitor. The tiny heartbeat of their unborn child echoing in the sterile room. With trembling hands, Jason signed the papers. The decision was made. He chose to save the baby. The room seemed to tilt as the doctor's words hung in the air. "We'll do everything we can to save the baby." Lily's eyes fluttered open briefly, her voice barely a whisper. "Jason, I love you." Her hand reached out for his, and he took it, tears filling his eyes as he whispered back, "I love you, Lily. I'm so sorry." The procedure was quick, it was a blur. And when it was over, Jason stood by her side, his heart breaking as he watched the life slip from her body. Lily's last breath was soft, like the whisper of a breeze, and with it, a piece of Jason's soul was ripped away. She was gone. The doctors did their best to save the baby, and after what felt like an eternity, the sound of a healthy cry filled the room. The baby was born strong and healthy despite the chaos that had unfolded. But the joy was fleeting, a bittersweet moment that did little to heal the wound that had been carved into Jason's heart. He held the baby in his arms, his eyes filled with tears as he whispered promises to the tiny child. But the weight of Lily's loss consumed him. He had saved the child, but in doing so, he had lost the love of his life. Jason's world collapsed in the aftermath of Lily's death. The weight of grief was unbearable, a constant, suffocating presence that never left him. He had lost the woman he loved, the future they had dreamed of, and he carried the crushing guilt of the decision he had been forced to make, the decision that had led to her death. Unable to bear the emptiness in their home, Jason withdrew into his work, burying himself in corporate deals and endless meetings. His office became his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the haunting memories of Lily's smile, her laughter, the way her presence had filled every room. The once vibrant home now felt hollow, and Jason could no longer bear the reminders of the love he had lost. He avoided his newborn child, unable to face the innocent eyes that seemed to look at him with quiet expectation. Every time he held the baby, his mind flashed to the moment he had signed those papers, choosing the child's life over Lily's. The guilt was unbearable, and he couldn't reconcile the joy of a new life with the sorrow of the life he had lost. So he distanced himself, leaving the child in the care of nannies, rarely even speaking to the baby, fearing that any bond would only deepen his pain. Jason isolated himself from everyone, friends, family, even his own flesh and blood. He pushed them all away. The weight of his sorrow became too much to carry, and in the silence of his grief, Jason was consumed by a loneliness that seemed to grow with each passing day. It had been months since Lily's death, and Jason's world had yet to regain any sense of stability. The pain, the loss, and the guilt still lingered, clinging to him like a dark cloud. He tried to focus on work, tried to numb himself with the demands of his business, but there was always a gnawing emptiness that nothing could fill. The baby was growing, and Jason's attempts to push away the child failed, but even his son's presence couldn't offer him any solace. His every action, every glance at the innocent little face, reminded him of the painful decision he had made, choosing the baby's survival over Lily's life. But then, one afternoon, everything changed. A former servant of the Walters household, a woman named Maria, appeared at his office. She had worked for the family for years, serving Margaret with a kind of dutiful loyalty that came with her position. She had been quiet, invisible to most, but she had seen everything. It was her silence, her fear, that had kept her from speaking out before. But now, months after Lily's death, the weight of guilt had finally pushed her to confront the truth. Maria entered Jason's office cautiously, her eyes filled with both fear and resolve. She had not come to him to seek any favor, but to reveal something that she could no longer keep to herself. She had to make Jason understand what had truly happened. She knew he needed to hear it, even if it shattered everything he thought he knew about his family. "Mr. Walters," Maria began hesitantly, I need to speak to you about what happened with Lily." Her voice trembled, but her gaze remained steady. "I saw things I couldn't say before. But now, after everything that has happened, I can't stay silent any longer." Jason looked up, confused, but with a deep sense of dread gnawing at his gut. "What do you mean? What do you know?" Maria took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts before continuing. "It was your mother, sir. She was the one who started it all. From the moment Lily arrived, she never wanted her there. She never wanted the baby. And she took measures to ensure that things would go the way she wanted." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly. "What are you saying? What exactly happened?" Maria hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the room, as though she feared someone might overhear. "She was poisoning Lily, sir. The medication that she was giving her, it wasn't for her health. It was meant to harm her, to cause complications with the pregnancy. Your mother wanted Lily gone. She didn't care about the child, she wanted to eliminate her." Jason could hardly breathe as the words sank in. "My mother," he whispered, as if trying to grasp the reality of the situation. "She was trying to kill Lily and the baby?" Maria nodded, her face pale. "She was determined to stop the pregnancy, Mr. Walters. Every time you were away, she'd find new ways to make Lily sick, to weaken her. I saw it. I knew what she was doing, but I was too afraid to say anything. Your mother, she's a powerful woman. She's always gotten what she wanted. And I didn't want to lose my job. But after Lily, after everything, I can't keep quiet." Jason's mind spun, his thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief and rage. He had trusted his mother. He had been so blind to her manipulations, so consumed by his own grief, that he hadn't questioned her influence. The woman who had raised him, the woman he had leaned on for advice, had plotted the destruction of the one person he loved more than anything. He felt sick to his stomach as the truth settled in. His own mother had not only manipulated the situation, but had actively worked to ensure that the love of his life, the woman who had carried his child, would not survive. "Why?" he croaked, his voice raw with emotion. "Why would she do this? Why would she want to hurt Lily? She was the one thing I wanted. The one person who made me happy." Maria's eyes filled with sadness as she spoke. "Your mother was afraid, Mr. Walters. Afraid of losing control? Afraid of someone else taking her place in your life. She saw Lily as a threat, a girl from a lower background who would never be accepted in the Walters family. She didn't want you to love her, and she didn't want to share you with anyone, not even her own grandchild." Jason stood up, his legs shaking beneath him as he processed the revelation. His world, which had already been shattered by Lily's death, now seemed to collapse around him even further. His mother had always been manipulative, but he had never imagined she could go this far. She had stolen everything from him, the woman he loved, the future they had planned, and even his ability to trust his own family. The betrayal cut deeper than anything he had ever felt. "How could I have been so blind?" he muttered, his voice filled with self-loathing. "How could I not see it? I trusted her." Maria placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but firm. "You couldn't have known, sir. She's very clever, very manipulative. But now that you know the truth, you need to confront it. You need to understand what she's done." Jason stood there for a moment, his mind racing. The truth was too much to bear, but it was the only truth that mattered now. Margaret had been the architect of his greatest loss, and he couldn't allow her to get away with it. He had to confront her, had to face the woman who had destroyed his life. With newfound determination, Jason looked at Maria. "Thank you for telling me this. I need to do what's right." As Maria left the room, Jason sat down, his hands clenched tightly into fists. He could no longer ignore the truth. It was time to face the woman who had betrayed him in the worst way possible, and to finally make her pay for the pain she had caused. Jason stood in front of the door to his mother's study, his mind racing, his heart pounding in his chest. The revelation Maria had shared with him had shattered everything he thought he knew about his family. His mother, the woman who had raised him, the woman he had trusted above all else, had been behind Lily's death, the person he loved more than anything. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound he had ever felt. With shaking hands, he pushed open the door, the sound of it creaking like an omen. Margaret looked up from her desk, her expression unreadable. She had no idea what was coming. "Mom," Jason's voice was hoarse, filled with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "We need to talk." Margaret raised an eyebrow, her gaze cool and calculating. "What is it now, Jason?" "I'm busy." Jason took a step forward, his voice trembling with emotion. "You don't get to ignore this anymore. You've lied to me. You've betrayed me in ways I can't even begin to process. I know what you did to Lily. I know what you did to the baby." Margaret's eyes flickered with surprise, then narrowed as she realized he knew the truth. "You don't know anything," she snapped. "You're too soft. You always have been." Jason's stomach churned with disgust. "I know everything, Mother. How you manipulated her, how you poisoned her to make sure she wouldn't survive. You killed her. You killed the one person I loved, and you almost killed my child in the process. I trusted you. I trusted you more than anyone, and you doesn't." He choked on the words, his chest tight with emotion. "You destroyed everything." Margaret sat back in her chair, her expression cold, as if she had no remorse for her actions. "I did what was necessary," she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. "Lily was nothing but a poor girl, a threat to everything I've built. She didn't belong in our world, Jason. I did what I had to do to protect you and our family. She was weak, and you were blinded by her." Jason could hardly contain the fury that erupted inside him. His mother's complete lack of remorse made his blood boil. "You never loved me," he spat. "You've never cared about anyone but yourself. I was just another pawn in your game. I thought I was the most important thing in your life, but I was wrong. You used me. You used my love for her to tear us apart." A silence hung in the air, thick with the weight of truth. Margaret didn't say anything, and in that silence, Jason realized just how deep her cruelty ran. She had never cared for him, for his happiness. She had controlled his life, manipulated him into seeing her as the only person who mattered. "I can't do this anymore," Jason said, his voice breaking. "I can't be a part of your toxic world. You took away everything I loved, and now I'm done." Margaret's face twisted with anger, but Jason didn't flinch. He had already made up his mind. He turned his back on her and walked out of the study, leaving the woman who had shaped his life in the dust. He went home, packed his things, and moved into a new place, away from the suffocating influence of his mother. He would raise his son alone, free from the shadows of a past filled with betrayal. Jason knew it wouldn't be easy. The wounds were too deep, the pain too fresh, but he had made a promise to himself to finally break free from the grip of a mother who had never truly loved him. He would move forward for the sake of his son and leave the darkness of his past behind. Jason's journey of healing began slowly. The pain of losing Lily and the weight of his mother's betrayal were scars that refused to fade. But as he held his son in his arms, he knew he had to try. Every day, he took small steps toward finding joy again, learning to navigate the world of fatherhood with a tenderness he had never known. His son became his anchor, a reminder that there was still light in his life despite the darkness of the past. Parenting was a challenge Jason hadn't expected, but he embraced it wholeheartedly. With each passing day, he grew closer to his child, determined to give him the love and care he had never received from his own mother. He poured everything he had into raising his son, hoping to break the cycle of pain that had haunted him for so long. Yet even as he built a new life, the scars of betrayal remained. The darkness of his family's actions, his mother's cruelty and manipulation followed him, lurking just beneath the surface. Jason learned to live with the pain, but he would never forget the cost of the love he had lost, nor the betrayal that had nearly destroyed him. Jason's journey was far from over, but with his son by his side, he began to rebuild his life. The pain of his past would always linger, but the weight of his mother's control no longer held him captive. Moving away from the toxic shadows of his family, Jason embraced the new role of being a father, finding purpose in giving his son the life and love he had always longed for. Though the scars of betrayal remained, there was a glimmer of hope amidst the tragedy. Jason wasn't the same man he once was. He was stronger, wiser, and determined to create a future that was free from the cruelty and manipulation that had shaped his past. He no longer lived for the approval of others, especially his mother, and he vowed to raise his son with the care and affection he never received. The story ends on a bittersweet note. Jason had endured unimaginable loss, yet in the depths of his grief, he found a reason to keep going. He found peace, knowing that, despite everything, he would protect his son from the same darkness that had destroyed his own happiness. The future was uncertain, but hope had found a place in his heart once more.